Hey everyone, welcome back to Make It Happen Mondays, where we talk about sales, business, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mental health, and everything in between with guests who I truly respect and I think make a positive impact on the world around us. Today's episode is with Greg Kihlstrom, who is a speaker, entrepreneur, and currently an advisor and consultant to some of the top companies in the world like Adidas, FedEx, Starbucks, MTV, and many others on marketing technology, customer experience, and digital transformation initiatives. He's also the author of 11 books. His most recent one, called The House of the Customer, was the basis for our conversation. Now, our main discussion revolved around how to take a customer-first approach that was employee-driven and why it's so critical in today's environment. He uses the analogy of building a house and starting with the foundation of culture. We went on to talk about how the customer experience is actually the key to sales and marketing alignment and how to create an agile approach that encourages failure and learning from it. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's make it happen.
What's happening, Make It Happen family? Big shout out to our partners today, Gong, Vidyard, and Chili Piper. Gong's data is more than valuable. It's cornerstone in any organization looking to collect the data that's going to tell them where they can improve and where they need to spend their time making changes. Vidyard makes it easy for people to use videos anywhere. No matter whether you're sending videos in email or on social media, posting them somewhere, or sending them in a DM, Vidyard has got you covered. Our friends at Chili Piper are so much fun to be around. They make it easy for people to get on your calendar. And every sales rep has got to have this function locked in. It's one of the most important things we can do as a seller. How can I get you on my calendar easily? Chili Piper can make that happen for you. Be sure that you're checking out all these great tools. And now let's pass it over to John to find out who's joining him today. See you soon, everybody.
Greg, welcome to the podcast, my friend. Thanks for coming on board.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, I was actually really intrigued. First of all, your background was really interesting to me, and it had a lot of agile in it, my friend. You have some Six Sigma stuff, some agile certification in business agility, and all these things. So we're going to talk about your new book coming up, House of the Customer, right? But before we do that, could you give the audience a little bit of a background on where you're coming from? Because you have a lot of accolades that I don't want to go through myself, and would love it if you could kind of give us a summary to set the stage here.
Yeah, sure. I can give a bit of background. So, I'm a graphic designer, web designer. Really back in the day, started my career as a webmaster at a tech startup, and so coming from a creative / tech background, I started getting really interested in the intersection of marketing and technology. And, I was doing some creative still along the way, but really started getting more and more interested in how marketing and technology work together. That also brought me to be really interested in the process of how marketing is done and, how these things are made better, not just the end results, but how the work is done and done better. And that's really what kind of led me to Agile was, in addition to, my interests in marketing and technology, I started a marketing agency. I ran that for about 14 years, sold it about 5 years ago. And so I got very interested we were a boutique firm, I never planned to grow it to hundreds and hundreds of people or anything like that. And so it was more about how do we do the best possible work? How do we have the best possible processes? And so that got me into Agile. And, at first I didn't really even know what Agile was, back in the day, but, learned about it, really embraced some of those ideas and principles, and, brought that to my agency. And since selling, written a few books on various topics of applying Agile to non-technical fields like marketing and branding and things like that. And, I work as an independent consultant now to a lot of large brands that are having issues really connecting strategy to the implementation of that strategy.
Love it. Yeah, I think before we get into the customer piece of this, I'm curious on your perspective on sales and marketing and the difference from your perspective right now, just because, and the reason I ask is I personally think that sales reps need to be mini marketers right now, right? They actually have to be part of the marketing program where they are every touch that they make, right? Whether it's an email, a call, a tweet, a retweet, whatever. I look at it as a positive impression, right? And that builds the brand, if you will, of that individual and the business. But the lines are getting really blurry right now between sales and marketing, in my opinion. So where do you see the line of connection and differentiation between sales and marketing from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that ties them both together is what customer experience is really the thing that ties both sales and marketing together. And you bring up a great point, is the definition to me of customer experience is every single touch point that a potential customer or a existing customer has with a brand. And so a salesperson or a sales email or whatever that is part of that customer experience, whether it's before, during, or after the sale. And I think the delineation between marketing and sales, I mean, I think particularly in a B2B world, a lot of people tend to forget that we're all consumers when we go home at night or when we're off work or sometimes even during work. But that whole idea, the expectations that B2C marketing and advertising set are still there, even if you're at work and you're a B2B buyer or something like that. And so I think that's getting more and more, those lines are getting more and more blurred and the expectations are getting higher and higher.
Yeah, they totally, and this is where I'm going with it, with with all the stuff like ChatGPT and these things coming out, right, and the hyper personalization. I think about people, I've heard people talk about all emails dead as a medium at this point because of all this automation and everything else. But I actually take a different view on it. I look at it as the reason that we hate spam, for instance, obviously, is because it's all irrelevant. Like nobody cares about half the stuff that hits our inbox. But when I look at something like Instagram, right? I actually, and now because I spend, that's kind of the platform I spend the most time on, just personally and whatever. I mean, Instagram knows me. And so every ad is like, oh shit. And like, I actually could use that. Like, that's pretty interesting. So if we fast forward where something like a ChatGPT can scour the internet and know us personally and know our business and know what's happening in the marketplace, and then all of a sudden send super highly relevant personalized emails to our inbox, do you see that there's a future where our inbox is actually filled with valuable stuff as opposed to total spam? And therefore, does it matter if it's a person or a technology that does it?
So I guess to answer it in the reverse, I don't think it matters if it's a person or automated technology that does it. I do think people appreciate things that are relevant to them. I mean, I think that's just I don't need to cite a Gartner report or anything like that to say if something is super relevant to me, I appreciate it more than spam. So, I think you're onto something there. I just think that I don't think spam is going to go away, but perhaps the same tools that, every time there's a new technology, and right now it's ChatGPT and things like that, there's always this fear and panic about, the world is changing and it's always going to be for the worse. But, within days of ChatGPT being a thing and being this fear-mongering thing, some guy wrote a program to detect stuff written by ChatGPT. So, to me, this means that, okay, yes, these tools can be used for ill or spam or whatever you want to call it, but I actually think the same types of technologies could be used to make our inboxes better, to your point, and make our spam filters all the better, because they actually know. I catch stuff in my spam filter once in a while that I actually do want. It's very, very seldom, but
very rare.
And the thing that I catch, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I would have seen that a month ago because I really needed to see it. And so, maybe there's a happy medium where it helps create better content, and it also helps, filter out some of the stuff that keeps getting through the usual filters.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting when the bots turn on the bots, right? So it's like it's like you ever see what was it, Matrix, the newest one, right? Where they're telling the story of why Scion now, why Scion was bad, but then the new version is good, is because when they started turning on each other and killing each other, like all the machines.
Right.
So I don't know if we're headed for that yet, but we're close. But let's talk about the customer. You wrote this book on the house of the customer and also combining it with an employee-driven approach, right? So talk to me about this idea of, the customer's always right versus the employees, because a lot of times it's kind of two different sides versus kind of working them together like you have here. Some people are like, nope, the customer's always right no matter what, and they kind of treat their employees like shit if the customer gets pissed. Or on the flip side, they over-index on employees and, they kind of question the customer. So it looks like you're trying to thread that line between the two, but could you explain kind of your approach to that?
Yeah. And so, I wrote the book because over the last year or so, I'd been working with several large organizations. I work as an advisor, usually part of teams that really go in and help to solve some tough challenges in organizations. They're going through transformations. And what I keep finding and what I've found throughout my career is, a company will say, okay, well, we need to invest in this tactic or this platform, and that's going to save the day. That's going to change everything. Everything will be great and whatever. And sure enough, it's the people and the processes that I'm not going to say it's their fault, because it's not. But they get in the way because people don't generally love change. Then that's customers or employees, and people have a hard time adapting to change. And so once you understand that and you build your methods of implementing change around that, then you start to build things from an employee perspective. And because those employees are the ones doing the work. They're the ones that have been doing one thing for 5-10 years. If they've even stayed at the company that long, they've been doing it one way. And then all of a sudden you're saying, well, you've been doing it all wrong. And now we need to start doing it this other way because of the customer, because of this, the bottom line, whatever. And so everything's got to start with leadership support, but involving employees in the actual creation of the new processes and getting their ideas, because again, they've been doing the work. They don't necessarily know what's the best thing coming out in 10 years because they've been kind of often heads down doing their work, but they have a lot of insights that, a consultant from the outside isn't going to see and, isn't going to have insights in until they know. And so getting more feedback from employees and making the customer experience part of the employee's job are, in other words, if customer experience is part of the motivation of that employee to do a good job, they're going to be rewarded when that customer has a better experience. And it's this virtuous cycle of continuous improvement there. And I think a lot of times people get that wrong. To your point, they say, okay, let's make the customer happy, or we've got a bunch of employees that are unhappy. Let's just do whatever we can. But really making this idea of this continuous cycle of, leadership driven, employee created and, customer supported. It's this virtuous cycle that when it's done well, it breeds great results.
So do you think, because I'm watching it in our industry, specifically in the tech space, right? There's, or whatever, 15, 20 years ago, Salesforce came out with the predictable revenue model, right? Where it was segmentation of roles. And to me, it was great for us as companies because we could scale really fast from a sales organization. I remember, 20 plus years ago when I started my first company, I kept hiring full cycle sales reps, and I was a player coach manager. And my management was basically keep up, and very few reps can do all aspects of sales, right? They, prospect, meet, close, right? All that stuff. And so we actually started to create, out of necessity for us, this was well before predictable revenue came out, out of necessity for us, I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And so it was us focus. I'm like, how can I scale? Because I'm sick of hiring sales reps, and they're I'm hired and fired 6 of them. So screw it. We're going to hire somebody to just do cold calls, then I'm going to meet, and then we're going to close. And I segmented it out in the specialty, and it turned into a really beautiful engine. And then it was, replicated at scale with Salesforce. I'm watching it fall apart right now in today's world because it is about as least customer-centric as you could possibly imagine, in my opinion. Because, the typical approach is cold call from an SDR, gets barely has any value to add, asks a couple of BANT questions, flips it over to an AE. AE usually requalifies it, Customers already answered the same stupid questions. Then they bring a technical engineer in to solve that problem. The engineer usually asks the same fucking questions. Now by the time the client is actually talking to somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about, they're usually pretty pissed off. So how does that happen? How do we avoid that lens, if you will? Because I did it for us, but it was us. It wasn't for the customer. So what's the framework we can use to make sure we're not falling into that trap? Because like I said, I'm watching it fall apart. And I genuinely think that this year, 2023, is the year that the no value interaction the tolerance is going to be zero.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good analogy is like you call up your bank and you have to keep giving your account number and tell them the problem 4 times each time you get transferred and stuff like that. So
or cable or your Verizon, you know what I mean?
Right,
like any of those.
Yeah. But you're talking about, I mean, B2B tech sales. I mean, this could be an 18-month, procurement process and stuff like that. So a customer can get very frustrated over an extended period of time. And so, this is where a big part of this is wise use of customer data and how data is shared within an organization. And in the bank or the telecom example, same thing applies to them, and they're investing tons of money in tying customer profiles and interactions together as well. But on the tech sales side, I mean, why does a salesperson have different information than the marketing team, than a the tech representative and all of that? Why is stuff not standardized? So this is why millions of dollars are being spent in things like customer data platforms and data lakes and all of these things to really unify that, so that I think a lot of customers are a lot more comfortable being self-service as well, to a point. And I think with a highly technical sale, with a multi-million-dollar transaction, you're not going to hit pay now on a credit card and and complete the transaction, but you can actually get pretty far down the process, even on a large sale that is technically complex. And I think a lot, again, this comes down to those B2C expectations of, I want to hit one-click Amazon purchase for literally everything in my life. And, again, you're not going to do that with a house or a car or stuff like that necessarily, but you're going to get pretty far.
I don't know. I bought a Tesla, man. I bought a Tesla and it was all online.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I remember I called up this sales rep because I was a little confused about something, and I started asking some questions, and I hear click, 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 click. I go, hold on a second. I'm like, are you on the same website I'm on right now? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I'm like, I don't mean to be rude here, but what value do you bring to this equation? He goes, not, and he was dead honest. He was like, not much. He's like, I'm just here, to answer. I was like, oh shit, okay. So I bought like $120,000 car online. Yeah. Right? So it's there. It's getting that dollar figure is going further and further up.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think, to your point then, those things that were helpers in the past are now kind of becoming roadblocks. And, if somebody does want them, if somebody does pick up the phone or wants to chat or something like that with someone, those people should be available, but they should also have access to, what did this person do? What have they seen already? What have they asked for? How far along are they in the process? Instead of it just being in, oh, well, that's the sales system or that's the marketing system. We're way beyond that. And to your point, I mean, 2023, if nothing else, it is going to come to a head. There's going to be a lot of frustrated customers, and there's going to be a lot of brands that really pull ahead because they're able to take things a lot further, a lot more quickly.
Yeah, I think that's the key right now. So I saw an interesting stat by Gartner a little while, just recently actually, that said that they broke down millennials, Gen Z, and boomers, and they averaged them out, and they said on average, 43% of people want a rep-free experience. They don't want to engage, and this is B2B. But the part that gave me hope was that of those 43% who didn't want a rep involved, they had a 23% higher regret rate. So basically, whatever they bought, they didn't like it 23% more because they didn't have a rep involved. And so I guess the question is like, how do we empower people now to meet the client where they are with the value that they need? And is that purely data and insights, or are there other things? Because also I'm looking at this from a perspective of, say I don't have the budget for a great platform to give me all my data and be super hyper efficient. Like, how do the companies that can't invest in these platforms meet the client where they are with the value that they need at the time? Because clients don't always know what they need. And they do need somebody in some cases to ask that question, to say, hey, have you thought of this, those type of things, but not the BANT, the medic, the dumb shit, sales process questions that we typically ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, without technology, I would say it would be probably just better training. So, right, and empathy with the customer. And I mean, there's lower tech ways of doing this. I mean, any process that I go through with a customer involves mapping that customer journey, and that doesn't take technology to do. It enables technology platforms to do great things when you do it well, but you could have you can use Post-its on a whiteboard or something like that and map the journey out. And what it does is it gives you empathy with that customer at the different pain points or the different questions that they might have. And so instead of the salesperson at every point asking them the same question, they're like, okay, well, they came to us from this channel, or they're having this kind of question. They must be at this stage in the journey instead of this other one that precedes it. So therefore, let me skip over that basic stuff. If they have questions, they can ask about it. But that's real time, in real life personalization. But, I think having that understanding of that customer journey, that helps, again, whether you have a technology platform or not.
I mean, the word I think that stood out to me there is the empathy, right?
Yeah.
Is having empathy for the buyer and how they go through that process, which is why I think all of us need to become buyers of our own solutions, right? We need to kind of sit on the other side and feel what it's like to go through that process. I mean, that's ultimately what design thinking is about, right? It's actually being a customer. Like, if you really want to engage with company, like, become a customer and see what that feels like, and then find the areas that you don't like and then come with a solution to that. So let's talk, going back to the customer first and employee driven. In your book, you use a metaphor of a house and having a strong foundation for it. So let's build that house. What's the foundation for building a customer first organization while keeping employees on board and happy and driven as well?
Yeah, I mean, the foundation really is the culture of the organization. And, it's reinforced by leaders, but it's lived out every day by the employees. And, culture, like, values are one thing, and values are very important for an organization, and they're something that shouldn't change, and everyone should know what they are. But culture is how work actually happens at the organization. It's what actually happens. Values are on the wall, and everybody tries to recite them at the company meeting and things like that. But culture is actually what happens when good or bad things happen. It's how work actually gets done. And so having a culture that is customer-centric it doesn't mean that it's all about the customers and never about the employees, but it does mean that everyone sees their role in terms of, how do I make a better customer experience? And so therefore, as I was saying earlier, I'm motivated by creating a better customer experience, and I'm rewarded when there is a better customer experience. And by doing that, I have more purpose in my job, which is a huge thing. I mean, we saw that with the Great Resignation, and, all of that stuff is like people leaving their jobs because they couldn't find a value in the job and wanted to do something different, for better or worse. When they have purpose in their job, that purpose can be many things, but one of those purposes can be creating a better customer experience, which really helps everybody.
So how do you, I guess, what are some of the things that, say somebody's listening right now and saying, yep, I'm seeing it. You know what I mean? My employees, I was affected by the Great Resignation. I'm losing customers to my competitors, those type of things. So if you're a leader out there, what's the first step? Do you have to clean house and reset on everything? Or is there a gradual transition to this where there's that light bulb moment where you're like, man, I say a leader out there said, you know what, I'm gonna become a customer, right? And they go through that process and they're like, holy shit, that was a nightmare.
Yeah.
How do they right that ship? Where would they start?
Yeah, I mean, well, you bring up a great point. I mean, there's some really good examples of companies that put people in customer service positions. I mean, Zappos, USAA, there's several that your first couple weeks on the job are being a customer service person. And sure enough, those companies have really good customer service and customer experience, so surprise, surprise, why doesn't everyone do that? But in lieu of change, that's a big change. That's an entire onboarding training, process. So that's a big change. I think it should be considered, but it's a big change. But, one relatively simple thing is to go through and have every manager rethink job descriptions in terms of the customer. What does everyone in the company do that somehow relates to the customer? And you know what? I'm sure you can find a role, and somebody out there listening is going to find some role out there that has no direct connection. But there's some obvious ones that I think are underappreciated. Like the software engineers out there that are writing software that end customers are going to use. You think of them as they're in some dark room writing code somewhere, never talk to a person or whatever, and yet they have such an impact on what those end customers do, because if they don't understand what they're trying, I mean, how many times have you used some kind of web application or software where you're like, they don't understand me, and they must have never tried to do what I'm trying to do. So, all of a sudden, even just thinking of those roles, that again, that's not even that far a stretch, but, start thinking of those roles in terms of how do you rewrite that position in terms of them serving the customer and them being rewarded by happier customers, extrapolate that out throughout the organization. I mean, what is the accounting and bill, like, what's it like to pay a bill late at your organization? The accounting team, they have a direct impact on customer experience, whether they like it or not. All of these areas of the company do. And so I think that's it takes a little time, but I think that's an easy thing to be able to do and to start really rethinking how that relationship.
So what are some goals that they can put in place? Like, is this an NPS thing? Is this like, how do you measure this outside of retention, obviously, and cross-sell, upsell, that type of thing, which is the obvious piece. What are some nuanced things that you would measure to identify the fact that you're moving closer to a customer-centric environment?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I have some qualms with the NPS score being used as the only metric out there as far as, CX and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also believe in, not making things too complex. And so, yes, I do think something like NPS or customer CSAT or, things like that can be used to say, okay, well, when this is going up, we are all winning. As a simple barometer like that, I think it's an amazing tool that can be used, and just say not just the marketing team or the sales team or the customer service or technical support team, but everybody, because we all have a role in this. And to be able to measure NPS or other things in terms of a broad customer journey, not just one step, and that's the only place we measure. I mean, more, sophisticated organizations are doing it more broadly and have more nuanced measurement generally. But again, a simplified way to say, yes, we are all doing well. We're doing well together. And then having the measurements to say, okay, well, when it dips, how do we diagnose what's happening? That's also critical. But I think rallying everyone around some kind of score, some kind of barometer of this, I think it's a great idea.
What other goals, I think, would you put in place for an organization that you're consulting with to say, do you break it down by, department and those type of things? Or do you try to look at it for holistically as a group so you can create that kind of team mentality towards that goal? I mean, obviously there's sub goals for everything, but what's more important, I guess, is the individual's goal towards and how it leads to it, or the group goal of how we're going to get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think both are important, and do think there needs to be a shared company goal with that everyone. So the challenge with that again is if there's a shared company goal, but there's some person sitting there saying, well, that's great, but my job has no impact on that score, then there is no, it fails, right? So I think that's where, when we can align everyone with that big score, then we can get a lot more granular and actually, I think, again, that's where some of these like lagging indicators like NPS and stuff, that they aren't always strong, because we don't know like what caused a dip or a spike or something like that. But again, that's where more granular measurements on a team basis or, product feature, however we want to break that down, depending on the company, I think that's where those kinds of things come into play. So, to answer your question, kind of a non-answer, but it's definitely both.
Yep. Gotcha. So is there a framework here? So we talked about the foundation of building this. What's the framework that you follow to create this culture, to kind of align everybody? Is there like some steps? Is there, a process that you go through with your customers to make sure they're on the right path for this?
Yeah, I mean, so I structured the book, using the metaphor of the house, and really because what I've found is we start, unless we can tease things apart, lots of things get conflated, and it's really hard to say that. It's hard to diagnose where challenge areas are, or where sometimes even we're doing okay already and we don't need to focus as much effort. And so the framework that I use of the house, the foundation, as we said, is the culture. The roof over it is the processes and the systems that are used. And those could be, those encompass a lot of things. Bookending those on either side, the walls, so to speak, are really the business objectives and the business outcomes. Because let's face it, as much as we value customers, the business has to stay afloat, and it's got to have strategic goals to keep it ahead of the competition and relevant to customers, and it's got to achieve those goals. So those are very important. But then in the heart of the house, so to speak, are really three key things, which is we need to understand our customers, we need to serve those customers with relevant content, offers, experiences. And then we need to listen to what they do when we believe we understand them, when we serve them with those relevant things. We need to listen to them and then feed that back into the system of continuous improvement, so that we're getting better at understanding, serving, and listening all the time. And I feel that splitting it into those three areas separates it into three very key things that, again, sometimes get conflated, and this spans teams and lots of things like that. But I think it's important to look at in granular ways like that.
What's up, everybody? I know you're enjoying this conversation. John does a great job with genuine curiosity on these episodes, and our guests consistently bring the heat. We want to take a moment here and let you know that you've got an opportunity to become better than you were yesterday. And you can do so by gaining access to all of JB Sales content. All of their training, tips, techniques, tactics, and takeaways can be yours for $1 a day. $365 for the year gets you annual access to everything, including our private Slack channel for members only, which you get access to all of us directly 100% of the time, 24 hours a day. And then at the same time, you're going to get access to our bi-weekly Ask Me Anything sessions, where you can bring real deals to the table and get the help that you need where you need it. This is very, very important. Sales reps that invest in themselves are often found at the tops of their leaderboards. Join us today and get the help you need to become the seller that you deserve to be. That URL, one more time, is joinjbsales.com. Let's get back to the show with JB and our guest for this week.
Are you a fan of customer advisory boards? And if so, how do you structure them to get the most out of them?
Yeah, I do. I haven't set up a lot of them myself. I've inherited a few where I've been able to lean on them, from time to time. But no, I think when they're structured well and when the customers are engaged, and I think they can work very well. I've leaned on them in many cases to be able to get some key insights.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the recommendations I make to the clients that I work with is, specifically from a messaging standpoint, right? A lot of us, from a sales standpoint, we guess on messaging. And look, my background's marketing, I understand it. There's a big difference between marketing messaging, sales ready messaging, and then actually messaging that the customer would respond to. And so usually what we do is we'll bring in like who are the personas that we want to go after, right? VPs of sales and SaaS, whatever. Let's go grab some customers. Let's put them on a webinar like this or a Zoom link and just start asking them some questions. Like have the sales team, going back to empathy, have the sales team, first of all, do some homework beforehand so you're not asking stupid questions like, tell me what you do and tell me about, that type of crap or what keeps you up at night. But there's some context to those questions. They then ask, hey, what's a day in the life look like? What kind of prospecting efforts do you respond to? What are your problems today compared to what they were 6 months ago? Oh, and by the way, forget our marketing language here for a second. If somebody asked you directly what value we bring to you, what would you actually say? And then using that information to then create messaging around what they said with a little context of their priorities and everything else. And then before we execute with it, with any type of cadence or anything like that, giving it back to the customer and saying, hey, based on what you said and based on what we know, this is what do you think of this messaging? And having the customer say, yep, nope, that stupid question or whatever. Great, then execute with it. Because to me, that aligns sales, marketing, and CS and creates the customer empathy and like everything that you're talking about here and puts the reps in a position where they're not just reading from a spec sheet that Sally, she's in marketing and she likes to be creative, right? Because that's all they're going to do is regurgitate that crap.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, that just kind of highlights how important it is to have the right makeup on that customer advisory board because, you want friendlies on there in a sense, but you don't want happy talkers that are just going to say, oh yeah, looks good. Great job. You want people that are going to be tough on you. And, I've been fortunate to have, there's some that are just nice and they're happy to sit on the board or whatever sometimes, but those are not the valuable people. The valuable people are the ones that are going to actually criticize and say, no, I would never respond. I would never open that email in a million years. Why, why would you send that out to anybody, fire your marketing team or whatever. But it's I think it's tough to find those people that are really willing to go above and beyond. But when you do, incredibly valuable.
Yeah. How do you approach testing, right? Because I know from a marketing standpoint, A/B split testing is just ingrained in Agile and everything else, right? You're constantly testing messaging and subject lines and everything else. How do you align that with sales so that sales can be part of the test and learn from the test as opposed to marketing? Because I talk a lot about this from a sales rep standpoint. Hey, split test everything you do. Problem with that is, as an individual contributor, it's kind of hard to get to a statistically relevant number for split testing, A/B split testing, to actually have any type of relevance. So how do you combine sales and marketing to test stuff like messaging and what's working and what's not?
Yeah, that's a good question because I do think sales, traditionally there's a bit of a, I've got my style, it can be a very personal thing, Sometimes when you get someone early enough in their career, they haven't been kind of shaped by experience and or trauma or whatever you want to call it. But I think I got to say it's a tough one because it's like, well, my sales style is, and I've even used those words before because I've had to do plenty of sales in my life that the agency and even as a consultant. So it's like, I've got my style, but am I testing my style? And why do I know that style works? Just because, anybody can win some, a sale once in a while, right? I think I probably have more questions than answers to this one because, it's tough. I think even with marketing, to your point, marketers, they're not averse to an A/B test and stuff like that. I think what I've found tough sometimes though is maybe it's a similar enough thing to the salespeople. Testing the process is sometimes different than testing the copy of an email. Like that to me, that's often found very easy to do, but trying a completely different way of doing things that's a bit, I don't know if scary is the right word, but that's a bit out of, out of left field for some people, I would say. And so that might be what's going on with a lot of salespeople as well, is it's a personal thing of like, okay, well, I've been successful in my career doing things this way. I'll be happy to change the subject line 3 different ways, but when it starts coming, to changing big things, there's a reason, and I talk about this in the book, how employees adapt to change is the same stages of people adapting to grief of, loss of a loved one or things like that. It's like the change is hard, no matter whether it's personal change, work change. Like it's not easy for any of us.
Well, I think that's why what I try to instill is that mentality, though. Like nobody's right or wrong right now, but let's test it out. So good, your approach, great. Like let's to your point, let's define it. So it's not a pure art form, because it's not. It never is. There's structural components to everything that everybody does. So let's define whatever that approach is, and then let's define an alternate approach, and let's try to bunch your way and a bunch our way and see what works. And at the end, that's why, very simple, basic examples here with cold calling, for instance. Right now, reps are like, why should I make cold calls? Nobody's picking up the phone. Why leave voicemails? Like, when was the last time anybody got a call back from a voicemail, right? So I tell reps, I go, look, you're probably right, but let's test it. Look, let's run a couple of cadences here. Let's run one that's pure email, and then let's run the exact same one and put 2 calls in it. And we're going to run one for 1 week and one the next week, and then we're just going to look at the data. And it's not necessarily about does the call get a connect and does it get a conversation. It's what is the overall cadence response like when we add calls versus just emails. And inevitably, we always find that when you add calls, whether you even connect with somebody or not, that the overall conversion ratio of the cadence actually improves. Because going back to what we had talked about earlier, it's a touch point. It's a marketing thing. It's a positive impression that might remind them to go look at that email and, whatever it might be. And so that's what I think let's circle it all the way around with Agile. That's what, if we don't have a structure in place to be able to test this stuff moving forward, we're stuck in our ways. I mean, I don't know about you, but like Agile right now, I think becomes extraordinarily more important than it ever has been, because things are moving so fast that if you're not testing what's working and what's not right now, you're going to get left behind faster than
and
before.
I also think another cultural part of this is, not every experiment achieves the desired result, right? So I'm not going to use the F word, because failure, there is no failure if you do an experiment well and you learn from it, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So, but I think that's a huge cultural shift for a lot of organizations as well. And again, the ones that got over this and the ones where, you can do an experiment, it cannot achieve the desired result, and it's deemed a success because we don't have to waste our time or money or effort on that anymore because we did it and we tried it. Like that's, as a leader, you should be ecstatic that your employees found that and saved you probably for the next decade, millions of dollars or something like that. And so, but I think, salespeople are afraid of failing, and marketers are afraid of failing for those reasons. It's like, well, I had this idea, but it didn't work. That's no longer the point. And, that the agile principles, we are continuously improving, we're continuously experimenting, and really there is no such thing as failure if you learn.
No, I couldn't. As I tell my daughter that all the time. As long as you learn something from it, and I think that's where we do need to shift the culture to. And this goes back to, again, our conversation about, customer first, but also employee driven, celebrating failure. As long as we learn something from it. So as long as because, again, basic example, I tell reps all the time, if you make 50 dials in a day and you get no meetings, that's a shitty day. But if you made 50 dials and you did 25 with this approach and 25 with this approach and you still get no meetings, to me, that's actually not a bad day, because you just figured out 2 approaches that don't work. Tomorrow, and you come in a couple of new ones, right? And so if you take this scientific mentality, you can actually stay motivated through all this mess, because if you're just doing the activity and not producing any results, that gets dry fast, and that gets demoralizing fast. But if you're doing all this activity and you're learning from it and you're crossing off all these things that don't work, eventually you're going to start to hit some stuff that does.
Right.
So I guess to kind of finish up our conversation on that, is there a way that you can, because I do think it's also culturally a challenge right now with especially some of the younger generations and, not getting not liking feedback, those type of things. So any suggestions on how to alleviate the burden of failure and reinforce the learning component of this so that people buy into it?
Yeah, I mean, well, leaders have to make it okay. Yeah. And some of that is by showing it as an example of a leader admitting. I mean, I did a talk the other day at an organization, and I was hearing the CEO was addressing the company right before I went on, and it was so amazing to hear a CEO being humble about, what, we tried this, I take credit for it, it didn't work, but you know what, we're going to move on. And hearing that from your CEO, from your manager, from the VP of whatever, that can be so life-changing to someone who is early in their career, wants to knock it out of the park and be amazing at everything they do, and realizing, oh yeah, there's time to not succeed in everything that I do and still be successful in my career. I think, all of this stuff has to be led by leaders, and it has to be, they've got to walk the walk and really lead by example. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's the one thing is that I've learned, personally as a leader is, let's go all the way back again to the customers. A lot of times organizations get so big that the leader is so far removed from the actual customer that they're making decisions with really no true insights into what's happening. And whatever their message they have all the way up at the top is getting filtered as it goes through, and the message is not clear. I mean, I remember this vividly. I don't want to name any names of this massive organization that acquired my first company. When I was talking to the president of that division, man, I was so in line. I was like, yep, you get it, right? Like this. But then as it went down to the SVPs and the VPs and the directors and the senior directors and managers and everything else, and by the time it got to the floor, the reps were doing basically the exact opposite of what leadership was said that they were doing, because they weren't there on the floor with the reps. They were saying it to their direct reports, and their direct reports playing telephone tag all the way through. So that's why those leaders have to get on that floor. They have to sit in the bullpen. They have to listen. They have to become a customer. And to your point, they have to lead by example and fail and show people hey, I tried this and it sucked, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Well, look, Greg, let's wrap this up. Where can people find more about? I mean, you got 8 books, you got a bunch of stuff going on right now. So I know the new one is The House of Customer, but where can people find out more information about some of the work you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of places. I have a website at gregkihlstrom.com. You can find all my books there, podcast, blog, all of that good stuff. Also, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. So just search for Greg Kihlstrom. I think there's only one of us. So it's easy enough to find as long as you can spell my name. So yeah.
I was going to say, let me spell it for people who are listening right now. It's Greg, Kihlstrom. Check him out on LinkedIn. And you're also, is it Amperity? Is that the company?
That's so the CEO of Amperity wrote the foreword for the book, Barry Padgett.
Oh, okay. That's what it was. Yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Because he's a customer data platform, right? So that's where you can kind of, if you're looking for some stuff to kind of get some insights into, then you can actually invest in some technology for this as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, Greg. Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody else out there, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did and pulled a few nuggets out of here that'll get you to think a little bit more like the customer. And like I always say at the end of all these podcasts, go out there and make somebody smile today. Because no matter how bad your day went or you think it's going, if you make somebody smile today, you know you had a good day, and the world needs a lot more of that right now. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you so much for your time today and listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. With your support and our incredible guests, we're one of the top sales podcasts in the industry with over 1 million downloads, and I can't thank you enough. To keep the momentum going, if you could go to your favorite podcast platform and leave us a 5-star review, I would greatly appreciate it. In return, I will answer any question that you have on Instagram. Hit me up there at John M as in Michael Barrows with a video question or a DM, and I will get right back to you, I promise. And last but not least, if you're looking for training, I'm adjusting my training approach this year, and I'm actually going to be delivering training to the masses. I'll be delivering live training the first and second week of every single month with our 2 marquee courses, Filling the Funnel and Driving to Close, to anybody who wants to join, and it includes membership in our on-demand platform with weekly AMAs. So you can go to jbarrows.com/open to check out the details. Thanks again, and have a great day.